not only as one of our scholars, but was it 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, he let some of his history students have muskets. And, oh my God, I just totally forgot the word. Bayonets. And they relived part of the Battle of Camden and then came inside and did a forensic investigation for his history class, and that went over very well. So that is one of the reasons why he is one of the leading historians and teachers of the year in South Carolina. So without further ado, teach us about White Horse Mary Lee.
If the applause isn't better than that, I'm going to go back and have me another one of those really good chicken salad sandwiches. Go find the person who did the broccoli salad. That was great. So let's try this again. Hey, I've always done this for people. I did this for people before, so I need a hip hip huzzah to get me going today. I'm a little bit tired. Hip hip huzzah! Hip hip huzzah! Hip hip huzzah! All right, so that's the good news. Y'all got me going today. The bad news for you is, as a public school teacher, and I guess this is like a class, thanks to your state legislature in passing a proviso, you're going to have to put your phones up, or else I'm supposed to arrest you, take your phone, make you go away, maybe stand you up in front of one of the cannons my student shot, and literally, Liberty Live had a 5-student cannon crew fire a cannon on a public school campus, and I'm still employed. So with that, it is my pleasure today to present to you Wedded to My Sword. And the title comes from White Horse Mary Lee declining a position on Washington's staff by telling him, "I am wedded to my sword." Now, this is Washington's staff. It would put Lee on the same team as John Lawrence and some obscure dude from New York named Alexander Hamilton. I hear there's like a song or something about him. And he had the audacity to tell Washington, "No, essentially, I am wedded to my sword." Now, I tried that with my wife when she was like, you need to do the yard, and I'm studying. I actually had a sword at my house I was studying. And I said, "I am wedded to my sword." And she said, "You need to get your behind out there and get wedded to the lawnmower." In fact, my wife had a lot of questions about my interest in the last few years on White Horse Mary Lee. Not interest about who he is and what he did, but interest rather in, don't you have enough to do? Don't you have enough that you're looking into? You run around the state talking about Tarleton. You just found out 3 years ago your 4th great grandfather was Colonel James Williams. You're giving this speech about education that some of you have heard, the soul of America. You got 7 history sites on campus that you're doing archaeology and research on. Don't you have enough to do? Why are you chasing another Lee down the rabbit hole? And she looked at me and said, "Isn't one Lee enough in your life? And how many books are you going to buy for this Lee? Because we already got a full bookcase of the other Lee." And then when I told them they were related, she said, "That doesn't matter. They're taking up my cabinet space." And yes, I will confess, and Charles will look down upon me and not be happy with this. I became interested in Lee for one reason, and one reason initially only, and that was the son. You know, the son who had a car named after him and a great TV show, Dukes of Hazzard. The son that was so well played by Martin Sheen in the movie Gettysburg, that son. And I became curious about his father, who had abandoned him when he was very, very young, had let little Robert get kicked out of his home. You know, maybe some of you have heard the story that before they were evicted from their home, Robert runs in and kissed these 2 ceramic angels at the fireplace before being evicted. And then who will die at the home of Nathaniel Green long after he and Katie died? Wouldn't even make it back to his family from exile. But as I studied, as I learned, as I ignored those of you in the audience who are William Washington fans and like to burn dolls of White Horse Harry Lee and effigy out at Utah Springs, I quickly learned that this Lee was a military legend in his own right and has a compelling story as well as his son's compelling story. Though unlike the immortality attained by his son, I suppose I have the clicker going on. I was about to say together. There we go. Never mind. Go here. There we go. This is somewhat backwards. It's interesting. Let's see what it says here. Made in North Korea. Interesting. Interesting. Backwards. But unlike the immortality attained by his son, the father has faded in many ways into obscurity. There's another interest in my newfound passion over the last few years for Lee. Did you know he might have his very own doppelganger? A twin of brothers in arms. They wore the same green coat. And that doppelganger is Bannister Tarleton. I see some skeptics out there. That is great. Good. On your table, you have a quiz. And Heather, you might have to click on the highlighted thing to pull up the quiz. But at your table, and if it doesn't work, they have it. But it'd be great if we could make it work. You have a quiz. It's here. No, that's not it. But it is at your table. You should have a copy. There were only 100. I didn't realize there were over 100 people here. So if you will look on with someone for this quiz, it's going to be the same questions on the paper. There's really nothing flashy to the quiz slide other than the document itself. And on this quiz, the first quiz you will take involves comparing and contrasting Light Horse Harry Lee and Bannister Tarleton. So as you as you look at your quiz, does everybody have one at this point? Yes? No? Does anybody have any extras in their table? Yeah, Brett, let me have an extra so I actually know what my own quiz says. Thank you. I got one. Appreciate it. All right, so on quiz number 1, it says, Tarleton or Lee, can you tell the difference between these two men? There are 8 statements, all true, and you are to list a T for Tarleton, an L for Lee, a B for both, and an N for neither. And I'm going to give you about 2 to 3 minutes to do that. You may begin.
Let's do it in real time.
Do it. I got to give these people a chance to think. Plus, we can't pull up the actual quiz. Again, 2 quick minutes. Got 8 statements. Determine if it is Lee, Tarleton, both, or neither. And just look up when you are done or you've given up. All right, here we go. Statement number 1 was born to landed gentry who made their wealth through the utilization of the slave trade to build the family fortune. Raise your hand if you put Tarleton. Raise your hand if you put Lee. Raise your hand if you put both. Oh, wait a minute. I saw someone just vote twice. Let's make sure we only vote once. This isn't like New York or something. And did anybody put in for neither? The correct answer was B. So if you got that correct, put yourself a check mark. If you got it wrong, be honest with yourself. Don't kid yourself on a practice quiz and put an X through it. Believe it or not, there are students that will cheat on a practice quiz. Number 2, became a cavalryman in 1775 at the outset of the American Revolution, quickly rose through the ranks to a display of aptitude for the job. Raise your hand if you put Tarleton. Lee. Both. Neither. The Washington people, William Washington people say, yeah, neither. It is both of them. It is both of them. Though I hedged a little bit on that because technically Lee is a cavalry to 76, but hey, I wrote the test. Number 3, gained early fame for capturing a leading general of the enemy in a daring raid. Raise your hand if you put Tarleton. Lee. Both. Neither. Correct answer is Tarleton, and it's that lovely human being who is not a member of the Lee family, Charles Lee. Number 4, was given command of a legion, an independent command of infantry and cavalry that allowed him to operate outside the constricting reins of the main army. Tarleton. Lee. Both. Neither. It is both again. Is anybody flunking out at this point?
Waiting on a curve, right?
Yeah. We can't do that anymore. All right, number 5. Won great success in a nighttime raid on a key detachment of the enemy forces encamped on a river, scoring a complete victory in the darkness. Raise your hand if you put Tarleton. Lee. Both. Neither. It is both of them. Lee, Tarleton at Mun's Corner, Lee at Paul's Oak.
Jersey City.
Number 6, was derided, insulted, and lied about by fellow officers jealous of his success and holding the high esteem of his commander. Tarleton. Lee. Both. Neither. Hey, guess what the answer is? You say it. Both. I am the teacher that one time gave a 20-question quiz. It was multiple choice or multiple guess for some of y'all. And every answer was A. It drove the students crazy. Number 7, fought effectively and gallantly during the famed Race to the Dead campaign in North Carolina, dueling on a daily basis with his mirror opposite. Tarleton. Lee. Both. Neither. Both of them. Both of them. I know we have different opinions perhaps on this. 8, after the war, served in the legislature, lost entire fortune, died in debt, and was soon forgotten for his nation for his exploits as a young man in his 20s. Tarleton. Lee. Both. Neither. Once again, originally it is both. Tarleton's grave is in a storage room because they can't find the actual burial location. His markers in the storage type facility. Of course, Lee has been moved around, and again, anytime you mention Lee, the immediate Lee is Robert E. versus Henry. So, now that hopefully I have you somewhat engaged, and nobody has seemingly walked out, though I see that Steve Smith and Tom Elmore are still watching the Carolina game in the back of the room. What is it?
3-3.
I know it was 24-3. How do we, never mind. Okay. I'm a Carolina guy. I promise you by the time I walk out of this building, they will have managed to blow this. All right, so when we talk about Lee, and we talk about what he learns in the North from 1775 to 1780, you can sum up his rules of war as following: speed, calculation, discipline, and cautious audacity.
Be a good tanker.
Another ironic comparison. You could take Lee's rules of war, remove the dates, And it would apply to the sun. Except for Gettysburg, you threw out the cautious audacity with that. And there are three great examples of this that we'll talk about. But when you talk about speed and calculation, Lee is going to use stronger horses, planned use of quick in and quick out opportunities. He's willing to accept deals for surrender. He's not interested in occupying things. When we talk about patriotic virtue that he possesses, he voluntarily is willing to die for the glorious cause in his 20s, embodying the principles of the revolution. But disorder will threaten this. When we talk about his discipline, he does use harsh punishments or threat of them. But the biggest factor is taking care of his men, establishing an esprit de corps. And cautious audacity, taking chances, but not with the life of his men. And this is perhaps where the son and the father are different. No frontal assaults, not staying longer than you need. And again, maybe the son should have actually listened to his father or heeded his father's rule of wars at this place up north called Gettysburg. I would love for my sons to heed their father's words, but it doesn't often happen. But three examples of this in action. One is at the Spread Eagle Tavern. And I will read you an account of how young Lee as an officer is able to resist an attack of British forces. And this is from General Washington's General Orders of January 20th, 1778. And I quote, "The Commander-in-Chief returns his warmest thanks to Captain Lee and officers and men of his troop for the victory by which their superior bravery and address they gained over a party of the enemy's dragoons who, trusting in their numbers and concealing their march by circuitous, I'm from Travelers Rest, I have trouble speaking sometimes, attempted to surprise them in their quarters. He has the satisfaction of informing the army that Captain Lee's vigilance baffled the enemy's designs by judiciously posting his men in quarters, although he had not a sufficient number to allow for each windows. He obliged the party, consisting of 200, disgracefully to retire after repeated fruitless attempts that forced their way into the house." An example of speed, caution, discipline, audacity. Or perhaps it is at Paul's Hook, the nighttime raid, where Lee's assault garnered him a Congressional Gold Medal. And in the resolution for this gold medal, it reads, "The thanks of Congress be given to Major Lee for the remarkable prudence, address, and bravery displayed by him on the occasion." Or maybe an example of Lee's rules of war in action are the John Chomp mission, where he detached a fellow Virginian to defect to the British, to join their units, to get close to Benedict Arnold with a means to abduct him. And while the mission failed, though Chomp does survive and return, how audacious do you have to be to pull that off? And think about the esprit de corps you have where Chomp willingly went. Well, that's not good. But it is to the south that we are interested. And in late 1780, he comes south with Greene. And what is the situation? As he later will write, he describes it as, quote, "They exceed the Goths and Vandals in their schemes of plunder, murder, and iniquity," end quote. Or, they are thrown into deadly feuds in some sections of the country, which with the fury of pestilence destroyed without discrimination. Was it really that bad? Well, you have another quiz. If you'll flip to the back, and this is a shorter quiz. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Once again, I like the time quizzes. Why? Because we have other things to do. And yes, there are students out there that would literally take all 55 minutes if you allow them to determine whether the the 5 acts listed below, take them individually, were committed by the British or the Patriots. And of course, Loyalists count for the British as well. Your 2 minutes may roll now.
So no vote?
No vote on this one. No vote. No vote, no neither. It's a British loyalist. You could go B/L, or you could go Patriot.
I guess I should have read the directions.
Yeah, well, you would, that is no different than any student in my classroom. And then look up when you think you are done. Can we get a score check from the back of the room? All right, great. All right, let's roll. Number 1, a wounded enemy soldier recounted he had been bayoneted or slashed 22 times, including having his skull split after the battle was over by the troops of the soldiers of the opposing side after he claimed he had asked for quarters. Raise your hand if you think the British did this. The Patriots. Hey, the British indeed, and it's one of my favorites. It's Light Horse Harry Lee's secret brother, Bannister Tarleton at the Waxhaws. Though I think some of this account, I'm not sure how completely I trust it, but we're going to blame him for it. Number 2, 2 surrendered officers were hacked to death after the pole being used to hang them broke, and the younger brother of one was disemboweled after asking the assailant, what would he tell their mother? Raise your hand if you believe the British did this, or loyalists. And Patriots. It is indeed a loyalist, Bloody Bill Cunningham at Hayes Station. And one of the officers and his younger brother are my 3rd great uncles, sons of James Williams. Sons of James Williams. And I have to tell a short aside, part of this, what makes this war, as you know, speaking to experts here, so violent. It's a civil war. And this was the case at Hayes Station. And it's a civil war that exists to this day. Why? Because while my 2 third-grade uncles were being butchered, my oldest daughter's fiancé's family, the Davenports, were in Cunningham's militia, and possibly were there. Now, Kaylee did not break up with Harmon, but I don't hesitate to remind Harmon that A, you butchered my family, therefore do not touch my daughter, and B, you lost. All right, so number 3, after hacking 2 enemy officers to pieces, the commander then exhausted himself by killing multiple enemy soldiers tied together by a rope and sitting in the circle. Once he gets tired, he orders his men to finish the job and tosses the sword to them to do it. If you raise your hand if you believe the British did this. Patriots. It is the British. It is the Loyalists. It is Bloody Bill Cunningham. It is Hayes Station. And it involved my family. Number 4, a wounded officer is at home convalescing when he is shot and killed by an enemy assassin. The assassin is later murdered by the murdered officer's brother-in-law. Okay, so the initial crime is the killing of the wounded officer is what we are judging here. British do this. Okay? Americans are patriots. It's a trick question. It's indeed the British. It's indeed an unknown loyalist from the Dutch Fort area who murders Johannes Kensler, who is the husband of a member of the Dreer family whose house site rests on my campus. That there's been archaeology done, etc., that we're working on to get marker for. The brother-in-law that murders the assassin is Godfrey Dreer Jr. And this all takes place sometime in 1781. The wounded officer was home after being wounded at Fishdown Ford. Number 5, a commander captures a deserter, has him decapitated, and has the head sent back to camp as a warning to other would-be deserters. The commander's superior officer tried to countermand the order to do so, but was too late. Who in the world would do this? The British. Patriots. It, in fact, is patriot. It's Light Horse Harry Lee. It is Light Horse Harry Lee in one of his in the north. He did send back a letter to Washington to ask, "Can I do this?" And after waiting, he went ahead and did it. And then the letter arrived saying, "Don't do it." And there's no record if he tried, like most children would do, where they tried to glue the head back on or stitch it back. I don't know how this happened. So Lee comes south with a tremendous reputation for audacity, boldness, and winning. And Greene refers to him in the quote above as one of the first officers in the world. We have seen already in this war the South wreck and will continue to wreck many careers. Gates. It will test Lee's desire for patriotic virtue and order, as well as the discipline he and his men. So let's do a really academic, intellectual look at Lee using this very technical thing called Good, Bad, and Ugly. It's a fine movie, but Clint Eastwood was not part of this Good, Bad, and Ugly. So, what's the good about Lee in the South? Certainly the race to the den. He performs his job with excellence. He parries, he fights, he screens, he eludes Tarleton all the way to the Dan River. And since we are at the Francis Marion Symposium, and I was told I have to mention Marion or else I would not get lunch, or directions on how to get out of mighty Alcaloo, South Carolina, campaigning with Marion, he subordinates himself. This man in his 20s who does have a tremendous ego, who is audacious, who is brash, he subordinates himself to Marion. You know, this taciturn figure. Older, an older man, yes. But Lee could have pulled rank if he wanted, even though Marion technically has a Continental Army rank. And this partnership scores victory after victory. Yeah, two of which are roughly in this neighborhood. Fort Mott, which I had the privilege of visiting this summer, and Fort Watson, which I might catch on the way out of the mighty metropolis of Alcaloo. It's an amazing partnership. Success at Augusta. If you think about it, put a National Guardsman together with a full-on regular United States military officer, the regular Army guy is not going to subordinate himself to the National Guard. And yet Lee is willing to do this as an example of his patriotic virtue. His performance in '96, phenomenal. He shows up. He discerns what the real key to '96 is after Greene had been sitting there for a few weeks. Hey, just need to take out the water supply. Duh. I almost can hear that in Lee's head, by the way. Which that would be something a young man like him would do. He accomplishes his task on the day of the all-out assault. He reaches his objectives. And then finally, maybe something you're not familiar with, but I'm going to plug it because Molly and Heather still have my paper on Eagleston's capture that I really want to see the light of day or sell it on eBay, somebody. Maybe to Tom Elmore, since he's not paying attention to my discussion. What's the score now? Oh, well, how long is this halftime? I must be moving along because I'm going to be done by the end of halftime. But Eagleston's capture, and those of you in Lexington County...
I'm getting my computer out right now.
Hopefully you can find it. It's one of the great victories of this war in the Southern campaign that gets no attention. Now, Eagleston is a subordinate of Lee, but he has been trained, he has been educated on the rules of how Lee does war by Lee himself. And in the first week of July 1781, with Lord Francis Rawdon in Granby, the South Carolina Royalists decide, yo, we're hungry. Okay, maybe they didn't say you, but maybe they did. And against Rawdon's orders, start down the state road, south towards Sandy Run, where they find themselves in a place called Huggabook Swamp. And it's still there, and it's still swampy. And it's still slightly frightening because it's in the middle of nowhere. If you go out there by yourself, you start to feel like deliverance might be taking place soon. See, I'm with that audience. You know what deliverance is. With that, and Eagleston sets the perfect trap. How perfect? He ends up capturing this large detachment of royalists without any casualties. Only maybe one or two of the royalists are able to get away and return to Granby. It's a complete victory. But it's in line with Lee's rules of war. He doesn't seek to fully surround them where men will give their lives dearly. He surrounds them on three sides. He gives them an exit. And he captures all the wagons and all but two of the royals' cavalrymen. Later that month, there will be an advertisement in the Charleston newspaper. The royalists are looking for recruits because they have to replace the old ones that got captured in this desolate place on Old State Road. This is where Lee runs into a loyalist militia. The loyalist militia believes they have found Tarleton because of the green jackets. And yes, Lee pulls it off. He sells himself as Tarleton and rides his men up alongside. We're going to protect you. And he rides down the line, greeting the militiamen, the loyalist militiamen. Had he just taken them prisoner, that would have been in the good column. But when the fight begins and his men begin to hack to pieces and militia shoot to pieces, poor Dr. Pyle's militia, there are accounts that indicate that it got a little out of control. And there is the ugly piece where whether he couldn't restore control or whether he didn't want to restore control, I mean, this is the man who had someone beheaded. It is not exactly the greatest day of his life in terms of living up to his own standards of patriotic virtue and order. There's the prisoner incident in '96, where he is bringing prisoners from Augusta to Greene's main encampment. He could have taken the circuitous route and outside the view of the British inside at 96. No. He decides to show off and march them in front of the British garrison of 96, which in his mind was to serve as an intimidation, but all it did was redouble the resistance of John Kruger Harris and his soldiers. And then finally there are the circumstances of his retiring, in which you have this thing where Lee is like, well, I'm going to retire, I'm exhausted, but you guys let me know if you want me. If you want me back, I'll come back. But I'm tired, I am exhausted. But you call me if you need me. And Greene's like, well, we need you. Yeah, but you let me know if you need me. I'm going home. And I'll come back. Well, we need you. Yeah, whether it was what we would call today post-traumatic stress disorder, or whether it was bruised ego at having been the whipping boy, the pinata of other officers in Greene's army who availed themselves of finally Lee here at Utah Springs didn't do what he always does, and look at Greene's favorite boy now, and he marches off. But it is an ugly end to a brilliant military career. Leaving when you're still needed. Where Greene makes it clear, we still need you. And yet he returns home. So, when we talk about the end of Lee, and the near end of this presentation, which I'm close to getting you back on time, what's the legacy here? Well, I would say his post-war civic virtue is a positive legacy. He will be a Federalist. Well, Rutledge is a Federalist, Edward Rutledge is a Federalist, Charles Cotesworth is a Federalist. It's not until we get deep into the 1790s, or in the 1800s, that Federalist becomes a bad word. He becomes governor of Virginia, 1791 to 1794. He serves in Congress, 1799 to 1801. He is indeed worthy of the title of being in the Society of the Cincinnati. You know, like Cincinnatus, he continues to serve the Republic. He is assaulted by a Republican mob on July 27, 1812. And with his health damaged and debt, he flees to the West Indies. He will die on Cumberland Island, where he is attempting to get back to his family. And when he realizes he will not return to his family, he stops at the home of Nathaniel Greene, who, of course, Nathaniel Greene and his wife have passed. Here's how Charles Royster describes his end. Before the end, the pain grew worse. As Lee became more feeble and emaciated, his paroxysms went on and on, unremitted, newly severe. Quote, his countenance and voice gave fearful token of the most intense agony, end quote. He did not converse anymore, but uttered only expressions of pain. Some of his last intelligible words blamed his coming death on the Baltimore mob. During his final few days, he was kept alive by the aid of constant stimulants. When the Shaws were in the drawing room on the second floor, they could hear the sound of the waves on the beach and the screams of General Lee in the room above. The corruption of Lee's body began before his death. Still, he retained his senses. On Tuesday, March 24th, he became unable to speak. And at 6 o'clock in the evening of Wednesday, the fourth day of spring, Lee died. And so, when we think of Lee and wedded to his sword and his life and legacy, it is all too fitting and proper that we allow the son to have the final word of today's talk. From his famous son. He was always placed near the enemy, entrusted with the command of outposts, the superintendents of scouts, and the kind of service that required coolness, address, and enterprise. And with that, I thank you for your patience, your attendance, and we wish to take some questions. Yes, sir.
Mike, one of the maxims of command is that a commander is responsible for everything his unit does or fails to do. What about his men's execution of British prisoners after their surrender at Fort Mott? Would you put that in the ugly column?
That should be in the ugly column. That absolutely should be in the ugly column. With that, I mean, again, there were, and as you get deeper into the Southern campaign, I think you begin to see an exhaust, and this is not to absolve him from this, but I think you begin to see someone who is mentally, physically, emotionally exhausted, and on that day, he did not exercise proper command.
He was also a good writer.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you repeat what you said about Eagleson's raid, the swamp in the area of Sandy Run? What was the name of that swamp?
Hoggabook. H-O-G-A-B-O-O-K. It's named for the loyalist family that was nearby. In fact, I am not opening this can of worms. I'm just going to say it. Don't boo, don't throw stuff, don't fight each other. Although Mr. Lewis back there needs a little energy, so maybe he wants to jump in a fight there. Hey, are we in the second half yet? All right, great.
One more?
So Hoggabook is the wife will be, if you believe the Emily Geiger story, who Wadden sends for to search Emily Geiger. And it made sense because the swamp, meaning their farm, is only 2 miles down the road from Granby. Yes, ma'am. Oh, Lord, Dr. Swigert, this is like my mentor. This is like Darth Vader being questioned by Obi-Wan. Of course, that relationship didn't end real well. But go ahead.
I don't know when he wrote his Southern campaigns, but my impression was he's a brilliant writer.
So, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because one of the things, and you know, anytime you give a speech, you often forget certain things to leave in, etc. But one of the immediate things that hooked me on my study of Lee was his memoirs. Now, not just any version of it, but the version edited by his son, Robert E. Lee, after the Civil War. And what's fascinating is that Robert adds his own analysis in here at times. For example, if I can I share a quick example? Or, I mean, you're a big fellow, I don't want you to tackle me.
Wow, that got personal.
Yeah, I don't want to get hurt. Let me read this just briefly. So, talking about 96, there's a footnote from Robert E. Lee that talks about the Polish engineer. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name because that would Travis rest and we don't do English. But he says, the man was, I believe, a truly good man, nor was he deficient in his professional knowledge, but he was very moderate in talent, not a spark of the ethereal in his composition. That's Robert E. Lee taking Thaddeus Kosciuszko, I'll try, to task after the Civil War, after all the lessons Robert learned in command during the Civil War. So I don't get any royalties from this because I'm not a member of the Lee family, but this is an interesting, Robert E. Lee opens the memoirs with a biographical essay on his father. And again, this is in that period, 65 to 70, where Robert E. Lee is now trying to find employment because, you know, the old job sort of went out the window. Anybody else?
Mike, in all fairness to Lee, I think you can say that he probably wrote and spoke the greatest epitaph for the indispensable man, Washington, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of the country.
Absolutely, absolutely, no doubt. Are there any final questions? I think we got one here, and we can go here, and if y'all are allowed, I don't know if we need them.
Maybe one more for the bad column. In his memoirs, he just showed, this relates to Marion as well. Lee writes that he and Marion looked at Schubert's plantation and decided it was too risky to attack, and that there was no fighting there. And Robert Lee notes, my father forgot that there was indeed fighting there with Marion, of course, at Schubert's.
Right. And again, Lee, none of these commanders, of course, we know are perfect. And I could do good, bad, and ugly on everybody except for Washington. I'm not willing to bring that voodoo down on me with that. And I think we have one more quick question, and then, all right.
What's the book you held up? What's the book?
All right, so I didn't bring the newest one, but this is General Lee's memoirs. I had it on my shelf for probably 20 years.
Which General Lee?
This is General Henry Lee, Light Horse Harry Lee, edited by General Robert E. Lee. And then Royster's book is good, but it's sort of deep for intellectually. Of course, Jim Pikich does a lovely one, and the new one is okay. The new one is the newest one is a good one if you're doing starter Lee, like this is your first introduction to it. So I'm going to thank y'all for all that. I hope y'all have a great rest of your symposium. I hope the Gamecocks win, Tigers lose, and then everybody gets home safely after this weekend.
While we're sitting here and stuff up, go back to the refreshment table.